Welcome to episode 190 of the Solomonster Sounds Off on SEScoops.com. It is Sunday, November 13th, 2011. I am the Solomonster. This was a week where we celebrated the best of the world and the worst of the world. Friday was Veterans Day here in the U.S., a day here in this country where we can honor the men and women who have served proudly in the past and the present. And I was able to do my part with my job, bringing some media attention to some very special individuals, which was a good feeling for me. And at the same time, we see the worst in humanity with this whole Penn State University story. I don't know how big of a story it is to people overseas, but Penn State University, a very prestigious school in this country, known for their honor and their pride, and the fact that you never really hear a bad word said about Penn State. And Joe Paterno, of course, he's been the football coach there probably for about 800 years now, but literally he's been part of that university for 50 plus years. And this whole scandal broke this week. I guess it's been building for some time. One of the former coaches who still had access to the university and was technically still a part of the school, he was still listed on their website as I think a professor emeritus up until a couple of days ago. Anyway, he's been brought up on charges, I think 40 charges at least, probably with more to come, of, I think, child abuse, raping children. I don't remember exactly what the nature of the charges were. It was something to that effect. But the point is, this is a heinous story that I have taken a great interest in, if only because I can't believe that something like this was allowed to happen for such an extended period of time, and so many different people knew about it or loosely had heard about it. And, we're not talking about a situation here where this person might be of a certain sexual orientation, or this person maybe is a closet shoplifter, or something like that really doesn't make that much of a difference, or people aren't going to make a big deal about it. This is serious shit here. This is disgusting, revolting shit here. And it's not something to be taken lightly. And, as I watch the news and I see students on campus protesting the way that, Joe Paterno is being treated and how he wasn't the perpetrator of these crimes, I am reminded that there are a lot of stupid people out there. And there are a lot of people who aren't so stupid, but choose to kind of stick their head in the sand and put their hands over their ears like a small child because they don't want to know the truth. The truth does indeed hurt. This is a big story. It's only going to get bigger. Ironically, the wrestling connection here, besides the eerie similarities in some respects to the WWE sex scandal of the early 90s. But beyond that, it was Mark Madden, former announcer for WCW, who, wasn't very good, quite frankly, in that position. But Mark Madden is still a writer. I don't know if he still hosts a radio show. I know he used to. He might still. But he's a writer. And there was a story that he actually wrote about this very subject and the rumors of allegations against this individual back in April of this year. And apparently at that time there was still an investigation going on and whatnot. But I just find it incredible to believe, I don't care how big or small the publication was, that here's Mark Madden who wrote about this story in April, and we're only first hearing about it now. Again, the fact that something like this was allowed to go on as long as it was, and you're talking about something as heinous, as despicable as, the anal rape of a young child. It's we can do wrestling, podcasts and make fun of stuff like Heidenreich and Michael Cole and stuff like that, but this is real life here. This is real life shit, and a lot of people are very guilty of some pretty incredibly bad things. And Joe Paterno certainly is no innocent victim here, and quite frankly, I hope every single one of them go to jail, because that's what needs to happen in a case like this. And I don't want to go off on this. I know this doesn't have anything to do with wrestling, but this was one of those stories that just really stuck in my craw this week and really pissed me off. So I wanted to sound off here a little bit and just vent. So I'm happy I was able to get that out of my system. But anyway, this week actually marks the anniversary of a very sad event. It was 6 years ago this week. It was actually back on November 14th, 2005, that Eddie Guerrero passed away. He was found dead in I believe a Minneapolis hotel room. And he was 38 years old. And Eddie, of course, was one of the biggest stars in wrestling at that time. And he'll go down as one of the bigger names in the history of wrestling. Here's a guy who was always known as a tremendous worker, came from a family of great workers. In fact, the Guerrero family held in high regard, much like the Hart family and the Von Erichs. And Eddie, the thing about Eddie was he was always a great worker. And you go back and look at his stuff in WCW, especially when he turned heel, and he was the Cruiserweight champion and had those great matches with Rey Mysterio and Chris Jericho and the other luchadors and the other cruiserweights. And you could tell even then that he was better. He was better than the way he was being used. Not that Eddie Guerrero back then should have been fighting for the World Championship. In terms of his work, I'm sure he could have ran circles around the people who actually did hold the world title at that time. But Eddie didn't really become a, quote, big star. He didn't become a main event player until later in his career when, in my opinion, his work wasn't exactly up to snuff. And part of that was he got so big. You look at Eddie Guerrero in WCW and he was a smaller guy. He was moving a lot quicker. Yes, he was younger. And yes, he would go on to have a lot of issues with alcohol and drugs and whatnot. But he got very big, too big in my opinion for his frame. His work suffered in those last couple of years. He was a great performer. I mean, he was entertaining as all hell, charismatic. He can have people love him. He can have people hate his guts. But Eddie was great in that respect. It's just too bad he never was able to kind of be the Eddie Guerrero we knew him to be in those later years and still put on those 4-star matches he used to have with people like Rey Mysterio. But, still struck down way too early. He should be around today. He leaves behind a wife and kids, and that's always a sad thing. And Eddie, who knows what Eddie would be doing today? I'm sure he'd still be wrestling. He probably would be wrestling a part-time schedule, my guess would be. Kind of what, not like Undertaker, 1 match a year, but somebody like that, you can't just stop. Eddie Guerrero's one of those guys. I don't know that I could ever really see him stopping wrestling in the ring. But we'll never know, unfortunately, and it's hard to believe it was 6 years ago that this occurred. And it's also hard to believe when you look at where Vicky is. His wife, who was never a performer, is all of a sudden thrust into the spotlight as a performer. She was horrible at the beginning, and Vicky now has established herself, I think, as a tremendous performer and a great manager at a time when there aren't very many managers in wrestling, certainly not in WWE. Vicky will never be mistaken as a great actress. In some respects, what makes Vicky so good even after all these years, and she's grown into the role, is the fact that sometimes she's still so goddamn horrible that it's entertaining. But that's her shtick, and she's become great at what she does. I sometimes wonder what Eddie would think about that. I would like to think that he would be happy and impressed by what's happened, but I also think that Eddie would have killed everybody backstage with his bare hands. The way that Vicky has been taunted and treated over the years, and the way that she used to be mocked as being fat and ugly on commentary. And a lot of that's been toned down in terms of the jokes about her weight, because number one, she's a lot lighter than she used to be. She really has gotten herself in good shape. And number two, they got in trouble for it with, I think, one of the women's groups, and they're very sensitive to that sort of thing. But I always thought it was very disrespectful, and Eddie would probably be, like I said, he'd be seething and foaming at the mouth, ready to kill. And quite frankly, if Eddie were still around, then that never ever would have happened in the first place. But you look at where Vicky is today, and Eddie's daughter now is Shaul Guerrero down in FCW. Her name, I guess, is actually Raquel Diaz down there, because nobody can use their real name anymore. But 6 years since the passing of Eddie Guerrero, one of the biggest stars in the history of the business. One of my favorite Eddie Guerrero memories probably is his championship victory at the Cow Palace in San Francisco over Brock Lesnar at No Way Out back in 2004. It was a hell of a match, and Brock even did a hell of a job bumping around for him in that match, and then the emotion of his win, and it was just great stuff. But if I made a list of the greatest Eddie Guerrero matches and moments, we'd be here for a while. I'm sure you have your own as well. So this week we remember the memory of Eddie Guerrero. All right, let's talk about UFC on Fox, which made its debut last night. Kurt Menefee was there to anchor the show with Dana White. Brock Lesnar was there as well. It's always interesting to see announcer Brock. It's the first time I think I've ever seen announcer Brock in a suit and tie giving analysis. It just seems very unbecoming of Brock Lesnar, although I thought he did a good job. He was a little nervous. Dana White also has to tone his voice down a little bit. He was kind of shouting, it came across to me. Whenever Kurt Menefee would throw it to him for an opinion on something, Dana White was all wound up like he had 6 cups of coffee just before he went out there. But I thought the whole presentation, was very slick. They've got, it's a Fox Sports presentation, and Fox is, they've got the football thing, they've got the World Series, and, Fox Sports is a big deal. And to me, the show came off as a big deal. It really did. From the moment that the Fox Sports theme song hit at 9 o'clock when the show started, it had a big-time feel for me. And I like the show overall just in that I like the background on Junior Dos Santos. I like the background on Cain Velasquez. They, of course, were the two heavyweights in the one and only match on this hour-long show. Cain Velasquez, the heavyweight champion of the world, who I don't believe defended the title once. He beat Brock Lesnar last year for the title. Then he had surgery. He's been off since then. Junior Dos Santos was the number one contender. The winner of this fight, whoever would come out as champion, will be defending the title next year against the winner of Brock Lesnar's comeback fight coming up on pay-per-view December 30th. It'll be Brock Lesnar against former Strikeforce star Alistair Overeem. So, this match had big implications. That's why Brock was there and giving his analysis and whatnot. And Brock did say, he said, I prefer to have Velasquez win so I could beat him. He beat me after all. I want to get my win back. That won't happen now, as Junior Dos Santos beat Cain Velasquez by knockout in the first round, which, for those of you on Facebook paying any attention, there was a thread about this a couple of, maybe a week ago or so, maybe not even. And my prediction for this fight was, in fact, Junior Dos Santos, who I believe was the underdog going into this fight. I predicted a Dos Santos win by knockout in round number 1. Boy, am I smart. I even predicted it right before the fight went out there on Twitter as well. So, unfortunately, for those of you who have asked, I did not put any money down on it. I could have cleaned up last night, but I didn't. So that's the one regret that I have. But to me, the whole thing is, Velasquez, and again, I consider myself to be a casual MMA fan, maybe one level above just a casual fan. But by no means am I some sort of MMA diehard. And my level of exposure to both Dos Santos and to Velasquez is very limited, which is why I liked watching the packages that they had on this show. It was dubious. It was a dubious decision on Fox's part. It was not UFC's decision. It was Fox's call to only have one match on the show. And I did watch I guess I can't really call it a pre-show, but there were other fights on the card, one of which was Clay Guida, who just absolutely annoys the shit out of me, against Ben Henderson. They had a match that was on the undercard, and that aired on, I believe, Facebook, and it also aired on Fox Deportes, so the announcing was in Spanish, so I had to sit through that. But I did watch that fight. That was a hell of a fight, and it went the distance, and Henderson won, and it really was. It was a great fight, and that fight on Fox, I think, would have been the difference between some people coming out of it disappointed and some people coming out of it thinking that they had seen a great show. But that was a call that Fox made. They wanted all the emphasis on the heavyweights. But like I said, I saw that fight on Fox Deportes, and the reason that Clay Guida bugs the shit out of me, and this is a guy who some people have compared in the past to the Ultimate Warrior. He's very wound up. He's always moving. He's got the long hair. He's a character. People love this guy. I'm not one of those people. I'm not saying he's a bad fighter. He's an annoying fighter, which makes him a good fighter. He's very frustrating to his opponents, but from the moment he came out, he would not stop moving. So this is a guy that clearly has some sort of form of ADD. He's got some sort of issue going on here, because as he's coming down the aisle, his music is playing, he's going, he's jumping up and down, he's rocking back and forth. I think to myself, okay, no problem. He's making his entrance. That's what most fighters do. They're trying to get themselves all ramped up and wound up, and they're bebopping to the music and whatever. But he never stopped moving. So even as they're checking him before he goes into the cage, he can't stand still. He goes into the cage, he's doing laps around the cage. Now they're doing the pre-fight announcements and they're introducing each guy. He's still moving. He's jumping up and down. He's going back and forth. And all I could think to myself was, I'm getting tired just sitting here watching this guy. Sit fucking still. This guy just got under my skin to the point where I wanted Ben Henderson to knock him out. I wanted Ben Henderson to just knock his block off in that first round. I was very sad when he didn't do it, but I was very happy when he lost. Ben Henderson won. It was a great fight. It should have been on Fox. It wasn't. It's not the end of the world, because if all you had was 60 minutes, plus all those freaking commercials that Fox had, you really weren't going to have enough time for another fight. I guess you could have shown clips, but to me, just showing clips of that fight wouldn't have done it justice. You got to show the whole thing. So it's almost better off that they left it off the show. But the Velasquez Dos Santos, that was the only fight on a 60-minute show, and it went 64 seconds. It was over. I didn't even think it went a minute. I figured it went about 40, maybe 45 seconds, but apparently it went a minute and 4 seconds. And I was very happy to see my pick come out victorious. So I guess it'll be Dos Santos defending the championship against either Brock Lesnar or Alistair Overeem. My guess would probably be sometime maybe in February or March of next year. Maybe that's too soon. But we'll see. But as a first-time show, would I watch UFC on Fox again? Absolutely. I know some people maybe who had never seen UFC before might not be as interested. They figure, I sat here for 60 minutes. All I got was 60 seconds of action. But as a first show, I'm willing to give them a pass on that. As far as the ratings are concerned, the ratings, at least the preliminary numbers, are in. And UFC, I guess depending on their expectations and Fox's expectations, they should be mildly happy. Basically, the show did about 4.6 million viewers. And the way I look at that is, I don't remember what Raw did this past Monday night, but I think on most weeks, Raw actually beat that number. Sometimes Raw will do 5 million viewers, although they don't do that as often as they used to. A lot of times I think Raw will do 4.6, 4.7, 4.8 million viewers. Granted, that's a 2-hour show. Raw's been on the air for like almost 20 years, creatures of habit, that whole thing. But Raw is a wrestling show on cable. This was a real sports show on broadcast television. And so I would hope, that it would have done a little bit stronger than it did, but it's a Saturday night. Saturday night is the absolute worst night. And I know usually that doesn't apply to sports, but UFC is not necessarily looked at the same way by casual people as baseball and boxing and football, even college football. It's going to take a while before people, I think, look at UFC that way. 4.6 million viewers on a Saturday night for a start. I think it's good. It's not great, but it's good. But also it got beat out by an episode of Cops. The episode of Cops that came before it at 8:30 beat UFC. I don't know if that's a good thing or not. That probably is one of the highest ratings Cops has done in a long time. You could probably give credit to UFC for that, perhaps. But I don't know. Anyway, I know in the demo, the all-important 18 to 49 demo, UFC did a 2.4. But overall, they did about 4.6 million viewers. They can build on that. They're only going to have about 4 shows per year on Fox, I believe, is the plan. And so this is the first of what will be several coming up next year. And you ask yourself, there was no bigger fight. Well, I guess there could have been bigger fights in terms of names. Like Brock Lesnar, for example. They wanted Brock Lesnar on that first show. And Brock didn't think he'd be ready. He had just come off that major surgery that he had. And Brock took a pass. And Brock was on the show last night. Brock's doing very well. Brock actually could have competed last night, but he didn't know that he would recover as quickly as he did. Would the name Brock Lesnar have meant more to the ratings? Perhaps. Perhaps it would have. But aside from that, you had the 2 biggest heavyweights out there fighting for the heavyweight championship of the world. They even said it was the first heavyweight championship fight of any kind on broadcast television since 1985. I think it was a Larry Holmes fight. That's a big deal. And if all they did was 4.6 million viewers, then what are you going to do the next time when you offer a fight that isn't for the heavyweight championship of the world? Is it only downhill from here? I don't know. There's more questions than answers at this point. So I'd say they should be cautiously optimistic. It was not a great number, but it's not a bad number either. So there you go. We did find out after the fight that Dos Santos, who was the new heavyweight champion, actually tore his meniscus in his knee about 11 days before this fight. So think about that. Dos Santos dropped Velasquez in a minute with a torn meniscus in his knee to win the world championship. This guy is serious stuff here. And still undefeated, by the way, in UFC. One other quick MMA note here I thought was worth mentioning. Todd Grisham, who was an announcer in WWE for many years, play-by-play announcer, in fact, on SmackDown for a time with Jim Ross, he went to ESPN about probably within the last 2 months, and he has been named the new host of MMA Live on ESPN, replacing John Anik, who apparently is going over to UFC as an announcer. He may actually be calling the UFC shows on FX next year, but just find it ironic that Todd Grisham, former WWE announcer, goes over to ESPN, and now he is the host of MMA Live. So there you go. Let's talk about TNA really quick here. They have a pay-per-view coming up tonight called Turning Point from the Impact Zone in Orlando. Quick rundown of the lineup here. We've got Speaking of injuries, AJ Styles, who sustained a pretty significant ankle sprain, I believe it was, and so his ankle is in bad shape, but he's still a go for the championship match. He'll be facing Bobby Roode. This is a match, by the way, that was made in the final, 5 minutes of Impact on Thursday. This is your pay-per-view main event, by the way. Jeff Hardy one-on-one against Jeff Jarrett, Rob Van Dam, and Chris Daniels in a no DQ match. We've got Velvet Sky defending her Knockouts title against Gail Kim. Mexican America and Sarita in a 6-person match against Ink and Toxine, their new, valet. And Crimson one-on-one against Matt Morgan in a match that nobody could possibly care about. So that's the Turning Point lineup. This show is, it's going to die a death. I don't think anybody really cares about this show. They've done a good job of building all the stuff with Bobby Roode and James Storm. James Storm is selling an injury. He's not even on the pay-per-view tonight. Nobody gives a shit about this show. Survivor Series is coming up next Sunday. I'll be there at Madison Square Garden on pay-per-view. Big show coming up. The Rock wrestling his first match, I think, in about 8 years. And he'll be teaming with John Cena in the main event against Miz and R-Truth. We've got Alberto Del Rio and CM Punk for the WWE title. Mark Henry defends the World Championship against The Big Show. Dolph Ziggler is rumored to be defending his U.S. title. It hasn't officially been announced yet. I would expect it to be this week. Defending the U.S. title against Zack Ryder. There is a possibility John Morrison could be added to that match. And we've got at least one traditional Survivor Series elimination match. It'll be Team Orton, Randy Orton, Sheamus, Mason Ryan, Kofi Kingston, and Sin Cara against Team Barrett, the team of Wade Barrett, Cody Rhodes, Christian, Jack Swagger, and Hunico, who apparently has formed his own Latin posse on SmackDown now, along with Epico and Primo. Primo Colon apparently has been added to this little group here on SmackDown. That's your Survivor Series lineup. There probably will be some sort of Divas match added, maybe one other match. I'm going to hold off until next weekend as far as predictions. I'm hoping to do a show next weekend. It probably won't be on Sunday, since I'll have to get ready to head over to the Garden. So if there is a podcast next weekend, it probably would be on Saturday. If I do a show, I will save my predictions for 191 at that time, since I don't think this card is finalized yet. Let's talk about Raw from Monday night. Raw was a tape show from Liverpool, England, and everybody always, I shouldn't say everybody, but there's always a contingent of people who love to bitch and moan about the fact that, oh my god, Raw is taped, this show is going to suck. Oh my god, Raw is taped, this show is going to tank in the ratings. And I think Raw did do like a 2.9 last week, which may lend some credence to that. But I never buy into that, because I don't think the number of people on the internet who are aware of the spoilers in advance are not going to watch the show because of the spoilers. There are some people, but not a majority of people. I really don't think the show being taped has much of an impact at all, most of the time, on the ratings. I'd have to go back and check what the competition was. There may have been another reason they did a 2.9 last Monday. Maybe there was a big football game or something. I don't know. But this show was, to me, the show was boring. You know, it wasn't necessarily a horrible show. It was not a very good show. It was just a very ho-hum kind of boring show. And the one thing I will say, and I don't think we should lose sight of this, because the product right now is not very good. Okay, WWE is in a period right now, if you compare it to where they were 3 months ago, when the CM Punk angle was hot, boy have they gotten cold. And hopefully that will change this Monday when The Rock comes back. The Rock, of course, is going to be on the 3-hour Raw from Boston. He'll be wrestling at Survivor Series. Rock has this innate ability to bring a level of electricity and energy and enthusiasm to the show that is sorely lacking. And we'll see. His promo that they showed, was it this past week or the week, I think it was the week before, when he accepted John Cena's invitation, didn't really knock my socks off. But I think when The Rock comes back on Monday night, he's going to make or break that show. It's going to come down to his performance. But the thing about the WWE product right now is no matter how cold it may be, no matter how bad you may think it is, let us not lose sight of the fact that there's two things here, if you're an internet wrestling fan, that you should be happy about. Number one, CM Punk is challenging for the WWE Championship. So yes, he's not in the number one storyline or the number one feud in the company right now. And yes, they did allow Triple H to beat him and he never got his win back. They did allow Kevin Nash to powerbomb him 3 times, and apparently there's not going to be a Kevin Nash CM Punk match. We can complain about all of those things. But the fact is, CM Punk is fighting for the championship. You know, which is exactly, at the very least, exactly where he should be. Thankfully, he hasn't been knocked down to the mid-card yet. And beyond that, take a look at who was in the main event of Raw last Monday. Zack Ryder was in the main event of Monday Night Raw, teaming with John Cena against Miz and R-Truth in a 20-minute main event match. In a match, mind you, where the people in England, this is a guy whose gimmick is that he's from Long Island, New York, and the people in England are cheering for him over anybody else in the match. They don't care about Cena. Cena's getting booed in England just like he gets booed in this country. The people were chanting Zack Ryder's name in the main event. They wanted him to get the hot tag. And it was actually Cena who took the fall in that main event when R-Truth held his leg down and got pinned. Now, Cena, of course, didn't seem like he gave a shit when the match was over. I was expecting that since John Cena laid Miz and R-Truth out the week before, remember I complained about that and how stupid that was, I figured, well, I'm sure this week something's going to happen to John Cena. Not that they're going to bloody him because they don't allow blood, but they'll really beat his ass down. And then The Rock will be on Raw the next week to kind of avenge his partner. But no, that's really not what happened here. I mean, Miz and R-Truth did beat Cena, but what difference does it make? Why should Cena care? Cena didn't really seem to care much when that show was over. In fact, I'm pretty sure he was cracking a smile, which is what he does best. But interestingly, it wasn't Zack Ryder who took the fall in that match. He was the real star of that main event. Now think about that. You've got CM Punk challenging for the title and Zack Ryder main eventing shows. And Zack Ryder may well go to the Survivor Series in Madison Square Garden next week and win the U.S. title. So if nothing else, we are starting to see some things kind of come to fruition that the fans have been begging for. The fans wanted CM Punk to be pushed. He's being pushed. The fans wanted Zack Ryder to be pushed. They wanted him to get some sort of recognition for his show and trying to, he really did. I mean, he's turned that internet show into something special, and he really did it on his own. Nobody else was going to do it for him. And I feel happy for the guy. The guy is having a lot of success right now. They keep churning out Zack Ryder merchandise. I think they just released a Zack Ryder wig on WWE Shop, which is completely ridiculous. But, it's a sign that his stuff is selling, and that's the quickest and easiest way to get Vince McMahon's attention. If you start selling merchandise, if you crack the top 10 of merchandise sellers in WWE, the best way to get Vince McMahon's attention is by doing that. And that's what Zack Ryder has done. So I'm sure he's making more money. He's getting more TV time. He's got a scarf, and he's got a wig, and he's got a shirt, and he's got the broski glasses, and he's still doing his show, which I think is very creative most of the time. How far can he go in that gimmick? I've answered that question. People have emailed me. I don't think he's a main eventer with that gimmick. I mean, he was a main eventer for one night last week. But in terms of Zack Ryder one day becoming a main eventer in WWE, not with that gimmick. He's going to have to go heel, or he's going to have to just... I don't know what he's going to have to do, but he's not going to be a main event player in WWE as the broski Zack Ryder. This gimmick was a great way to kind of get his foot in the door, to get noticed, to build a fan following. But if this guy is going to continue to improve, and he's going to continue to sell merchandise, and there are plans at some point for him to possibly fight for a world championship, which just seems completely far-fetched to me right now, it's going to have to be with a different character, because he can only go so far in this gimmick. But Zack Ryder doesn't have to be a world champion. Zack Ryder can be exactly where he is now for the next 3, 4, 5 years and have a great career for himself and make a lot of money. So I'm happy for the guy. So those are the two things that jumped out at me from watching Raw Monday night. I tried to be optimistic. I tried to look at the big picture and say, hey, this is kind of cool. Punk's fighting for this title, and Zack's going to fight for the U.S. title. This is really cool. But aside from that, this show didn't do anything for me. This show kind of sucked. Kevin Nash did a promo on this show where I see people saying, wow, this was the best Kevin Nash promo since he came back. That's not really saying much. Let's be honest, okay? Kevin Nash, his promos since he came back have sucked. And I don't put all the blame on Kevin Nash for that, because Kevin Nash can be a very witty, articulate guy. A big part of it is the fact that he's got to adhere to the same scripted bullshit that everybody else does. So they give him a script. He's got to memorize shit. He's not very good at that. And I'm sure the promo on Monday night was no different. He was given a script. This is what you need to say. This is why you hate Triple H. And he went out there. He did the promo. He made fewer faux pas in this promo than he has before. That's the best thing I can say about it. To me, when Nash speaks on the microphone and he does these promos, it still sounds completely contrived. He stumbles over his words. He has not been very good. So yes, maybe this was the best Kevin Nash promo since he came back. That's not saying much. I still didn't think this was a very good promo. And I didn't like it when he threw that freaking line in there about how I booked myself in the main event, or as soon as he used I booked myself, it's like, shut the fuck up. I mean, really, just shut the fuck up with this, this inside speak. This is what happens, when you have CM Punk go out there, he starts this whole movement of shoot promos and pipe bombs and all this, and now other people start doing it. And it just completely waters it down. Nobody cares to hear Kevin Nash go out there talking about how he booked himself in the main event, okay? I don't want to hear about how Kevin Nash booked himself in anything, because the last time Kevin Nash booked himself in a main event, he beat Goldberg for the championship and did more damage to WCW than anything else. We don't need Kevin Nash booking anything in a wrestling ring. To me, the best match on Raw Monday night, and the main event went 17, 18 minutes. It wasn't a bad match, but my favorite match from Raw Monday night was actually Dolph Ziggler against John Morrison. I thought the two of them actually had a hell of a match. The crowd was kind of quiet for most of it, but when the match was over, I thought, I don't know what they're doing as far as beating Ziggler every week. They've done this losing streak gimmick with Morrison for a while. I don't want to see them do the same thing with Ziggler because he's better than that. The minute they mentioned on commentary that Morrison was on a losing streak, it's the first time they've actually acknowledged it. I figured, okay, he's probably winning this match. Why else would they suddenly bring it up unless he was finally going to get that first big win so they can make a big deal about it, which is exactly what they did. And hopefully, that's good news for Morrison, because unless he's planning on leaving the company, and I don't think they would have had him go over on the U.S. champion here unless they knew he was sticking around, which tells me that he probably has either re-signed with them already or has given them the indication that he will. But in spite of the finish, I thought they had a hell of a match. I thought they worked really well together. Dolph Ziggler is great. He has really become an all-around tremendous performer. He's very entertaining. But his matches are fantastic. He can bump around like nobody I've seen since Kurt Hennig back in the day. And he really hardly ever has a bad match. And when he had those matches with Daniel Bryan about a year ago, he had that series of 3 or 4 matches in a row. One at the Bragging Rights pay-per-view, then Raw, then SmackDown. I mean, they had some fucking awesome matches. And Ziggler's had 1 or 2 matches over the last couple of months with Randy Orton that have been really good. This one was no different. So Ziggler is that guy that you really got to keep an eye on. I mean, there's big things in his future. There's no doubt about that. He just has to change that shitty name. Another news note here I wanted to bring up. This is courtesy of a report from the Wrestling Observer newsletter. It's a little bit of controversy over the suspension of Evan Bourne. I think I mentioned on the show last week, Evan Bourne was suspended for 30 days due to a wellness policy violation believed to have been some form of synthetic marijuana. Bourne's one of these guys that's known as kind of a pothead, and instead of using the real stuff and being fined a couple of $1,000s for it, a lot of guys have started using essentially fake marijuana. And the belief is that that's what he got busted for. I believe they call it spice, is the form of synthetic marijuana. There's some controversy in that apparently he was doing the stuff at a party with other WWE performers. And that includes some people on the card a little bit higher up than Evan Bourne. I don't know if that means main eventers necessarily, but certainly people that have a higher profile on the roster than he does, who were doing the same thing at this party, and yet he was the only person who got popped for this wellness policy violation. So of course this begs the question, how fair is the WWE wellness policy? Look at some of the names of people that have been suspended recently. You've got Evan Bourne, you've got a referee being Mike Chioda, Sin Cara suspended. Sin Cara is a pretty big name. Obviously, Sin Cara is not somebody that the company wants to have problems with because it makes Triple H look bad, even though Triple H really wasn't the person who recruited him, even though he gets credit for it. But you never hear about the John Cenas of the world, or Randy Orton, or The Big Show, or The Undertaker, and certainly not Triple H, who I don't believe is being tested because technically he's an executive in the company. But you never really hear the big names get popped for anything. And you cannot convince me that the big names, or at least not all of them, are not on something. They're probably just doing a much better job of either cycling on and cycling off, or hiding whatever it is that they're doing. Because to me, it's impossible for me to believe that all of these mid-card or even upper mid-card guys, low-card guys are getting popped left and right, and we have yet to see one really, truly big name. I mean, the last time I could think of a really big name being suspended for a wellness policy violation, and it really did fuck WWE over, to their credit, and he got suspended anyway, was Jeff Hardy back in 2008. I mean, there were a lot of people very upset when Jeff Hardy lost the way he did to Randy Orton at the Royal Rumble. I was at that pay-per-view, and the air just went out of Madison Square Garden that night when Orton gave him the RKO like 5 minutes into their match and just beat him, because people thought Jeff Hardy is at the apex of his popularity. You got to put the belt on him. I don't care what your plans are for WrestleMania that year. You got to get the title off Orton, put it on Jeff Hardy, and let him run with it. And the company didn't do that, and Orton beat Jeff Hardy at the Royal Rumble. A lot of people very upset about that. And 2 months later, we found out that Hardy was being suspended. And imagine if Jeff Hardy had won the championship from Randy Orton and was going to go into WrestleMania as the champion. Imagine how that would have fucked WWE over. 2 or 3 weeks before the biggest pay-per-view of the year, to have your world champion, your WWE champion, suspended and have to strip him of the title. So, hindsight being what it is, it was a good call by the company. Even so, Jeff Hardy, I remember, was supposed to win Money in the Bank that year, and plans had to change. But that's the last really, truly big-name star in the company that I could remember being popped for a wellness policy violation. I mean, it's possible there's been one since then that I'm just not thinking of. But it's an interesting question to ask. You know, here's Evan Bourne doing something that he shouldn't be doing, and he gets in trouble for it, and he's hardly the only person who is doing it at the same time at the same party, but why is his name the only one coming up here? It's a valid question to ask, and there's a lot of people apparently backstage in WWE asking the same question. There was some semi-big TNA news this week as well, in that TNA has signed a developmental deal with Ohio Valley Wrestling. OVW, of course, was WWE's official developmental territory from 2000 to about 2008, I believe. A lot of big names came through OVW during that time. John Cena, Randy Orton, Batista, Brock Lesnar, Shelton Benjamin, a lot of others as well. And TNA has signed a developmental deal with them. OVW will officially be the developmental and training facility for TNA. Bruce Pritchard is reportedly the man who pitched this idea a while back. This has been in the work for many months. And I believe Bruce Pritchard, Eric Bischoff, and Dixie Carter went down there a couple months ago to kind of scout the place out. And they'll be working closely with OVW owner Danny Davis, not to be confused with former WWE crooked referee Dangerous Danny Davis. And the promotion it's probably going to be sending talent to OVW to hone their skills. So there may be some current TNA stars who were sent over there to kind of get better. They'd probably be very well suited to send some of the knockouts there as well. WWE should probably send some of their divas over anyway, just for the hell of it. Never a bad move to invest in your future, so I think this is a positive step for TNA. I have 2 very sad stories here, unfortunately, to talk about. One of which concerns Henry Godwin, real name Mark Canterbury, who is in very serious condition after an automobile accident. Of course, Canterbury wrestled in WCW as Shanghai Pierce, and most notably in WWE as Henry Godwin, the hog farmer. He is in intensive care. He was in an auto accident that took place in West Virginia. There's been some reports that he may have driven his vehicle off a cliff. I believe he actually drove his vehicle off an embankment. And he broke his leg in 3 places, sustained as many as 12 broken ribs, 2 punctured lungs, to the point where he's got tubes running down his throat. He's unable to communicate using his voice. I believe he is awake and alert and communicating in other ways. He had a second surgery on his leg on Thursday of this week. And again, he's answering questions by nodding and stuff like that because of the tubes he's unable to speak. He's on a ventilator as well. And the doctors apparently feel that he's right where he should be at this point, but still a very serious situation. And his lungs are the biggest hurdle right now. The fact that both of them were damaged is certainly not good news. So hopefully everything works out for him, and if it does, it's going to be a very long road to recovery, very similar to Barry Windham, who suffered a heart attack and possibly a stroke. And he is out of the woods, but he has a very long road ahead of him as well. And this just sounds like a horrific wreck. I don't know exactly what caused it. I don't think that's been revealed yet. If he fell asleep at the wheel, if he was sideswiped by a car, if he was, under the influence of something. I mean, we don't know anything at this point as far as why the accident occurred. Hopefully we will soon. So best wishes to him. And another sad story for another wrestling legend, Kamala, the Ugandan giant. His real name, James Harris. Used to be known as Sugar Bear Harris early in his career, and he was actually a headliner in the Memphis area. And in WWF, he also became a very big star. He was a bigger star the first time through WWF in the mid-'80s than he was when he came back and became a good guy and was being managed by the Reverend Slick and all that. He was more of a comedy character at that point. But he had his foot amputated earlier this week, unfortunately, due to complications from diabetes and high blood pressure. It was WrestlingNewsCenter.com was actually the website to break that news, so I want to give them credit. They cover a lot of Memphis wrestling-related news, and unfortunately, the amputation of his foot, it's not going to be like Kerry Von Erich, who stuck a boot on and kept on wrestling. His career is over. I think Kamala's over 60 years old at this point. And the last time he was seen on a national level, I had to look it up because I couldn't even remember. It was actually in TNA. He was at the Slammiversary pay-per-view back in 2008 when they did the whole wedding angle involving Jay Lethal, who was doing his Black Machismo gimmick at the time, and he was being married to SoCal Val. And Kamala appeared at the wedding as one of the guests. So that would have been the last time he was seen at a major promotion on TV. And I know he's been a truck driver for the last several years. He's been a truck driver for a while now. And again, I don't know which foot was amputated, but it could very well have an impact on his career as a truck driver as well. So it's just a very sad situation. And again, it's a message to people out there who suffer from diabetes. I was very open on this show last year when my aunt passed away last summer, that she had issues with diabetes as well. I don't remember if it was type 2 or what it was, but we never did find out exactly what happened to her that led to her passing away. I don't want to get into the whole thing again, but it was a pretty bad experience for all of us when that happened. And the belief is that she just wasn't taking care of herself. When you have something as serious as diabetes, you have to be on that like white on rice. You've got to stay on top of things and check your blood sugar and stay away from certain foods and do what you have to do to keep yourself healthy. And I'm not saying that he wasn't doing that, but what I'm saying is I know there's a lot of people out there who suffer from diabetes and perhaps aren't doing what they should be doing. So if nothing else, use this as an example that, you got to get your shit together and take care of yourself, because from one day to the next, you really don't know what might happen. So one thing I want to mention here before we get to the mailbag, I actually want to plug something here. A good buddy of mine wrestles for WWE Hall of Famer Johnny Rodz in his World of Unpredictable Wrestling promotion here in Brooklyn, New York. They have shows several times a year at the world-famous Gleason's Gym. I believe there will be another one coming up next month. And Amish Cousin Simon, one half of the Amish Cousins tag team, along with his tag team partner Cyrus. And apparently they are in high demand, as they are going to be appearing at a Victory Pro Wrestling show, an event coming up next Saturday, November 19th at the VFW Hall in Center Reach, New York. 31 Horse Block Road is the address. To be specific, you can go to victoryprowrestling.com for more information. I don't believe they're listed on the website right now, but they will be at that event. And I wanted to give him a shout out because, well, I can do that. It's my show, and he deserves it. So if you're into independent wrestling and you want to go check that show out, it'll be in Long Island next Saturday night. You can go. You can root for the Amish Cousins, who perhaps one day will be tossed around on SmackDown by the Big Show, much the same way that the French Stallion was this past Friday night when Big Show had his little exhibition. One of the people that Big Show was in the ring with was Tom LaRufa. And for those of you who have absolutely no idea who that is, which is probably most of you, you may remember I was talking about Lance Storm's World of Hurt reality show many months back when that show was still airing. There's actually a second season of World of Hurt that's going to be airing up in Canada. Lance Storm will not have anything to do with that project. They actually got Rowdy Roddy Piper to be the host and head trainer for that. But on that first season of World of Hurt, the standout performer, by far, of all the people on that show, was this Frenchman who called himself the French Stallion. And it was a tremendous character who, I don't know how much of that character is really him. I've heard him speak before. He sounds the same in real life as he does when he's in character. But that was the French Stallion on SmackDown Friday night. Hopefully one of these days he'll have a chance to actually be signed to a contract and WWE can find something to do with him. And it's one of those things where, when you're an independent wrestler and you've got a certain character, you've got a certain personality, you never know who might be watching. So again, hey, one day we may see the Amish Cousins on SmackDown. Hey, if the Bushwhackers can get a big break in wrestling, then so can the Amish Cousins. So anyway, go check that show out. and show your support. Also, show your support for the Sound Off. You can leave a review for the show in iTunes, and it's very easy to do. Some of you have asked, I don't know how. It's so easy a caveman could do it. You just go into iTunes, you can rate the show, I think, on a scale of 1 to 5 stars, and there should be a thing there that says write a review, and you click that, you can leave a review, and if you do, you let me know about it, and I will give you a shout out right here on the podcast. So definitely do that if you have a few minutes. I would very much appreciate it. Also, one other quick note here for those of you who are probably wondering whatever happened to the segment where I would pick a match and review it, the match anatomy, if you will. It is coming up soon. I've gotten a whole bunch of different matches, probably more than I even need. I'm probably backlogged now. I've got a whole list of matches that you guys suggested I watch, some good, some bad. And that first segment will probably be coming up in the next week or two. There's been so much going on, I haven't really had time. I'm looking at maybe the Goldberg-Hulk Hogan match from Nitro in '98, which is not a terribly long match, but I've seen bits and pieces of it recently, and it actually got me excited to watch the whole match again. And I may do that. I may feature that match as the first match as part of that segment, so that'll be coming up in the next few weeks. And also, those of you that have asked about an official Sound Off t-shirt, I also am working on that. I had a couple of different ideas, and I should have something to put together. Maybe I'll run it by you guys on Facebook first, maybe 1 or 2 designs, see what you think. And there should be something new on that in the next few weeks as well. So all of those things in the pipeline. I have not forgotten about them, I assure you. You can email me your questions, comments, suggestions for any and all things to thesolomonster@gmail.com. That's all one word, thesolomonster@gmail.com. Let's get right into it here. This first question from the mailbag this week comes from TJ. Been listening to the show since episode 81. He was a huge WCW fan back in the day, until around 2000. You like most people. While I'm a huge Jim Ross fan, he says, I was wondering where you might put Tony Schiavone on the list of all-time great announcers. To me, he has to be top 5. Also, I think over the past month, TNA has put out a much better product than WWE. Just wanted to get your thoughts on that. Keep up the good work. I'll address the second part of your question first. TNA has done some good stuff. The Bobby Roode James Storm stuff, in spite of the fact that they rushed it, which was a huge mistake, it's actually been pretty good. And TNA has not sucked as hard as it has in the past. But let's not take, for example, 1 or 2 good storylines and pretend that Impact is all of a sudden a great wrestling show. Because from what I've seen of it, it's still somewhat difficult for me to sit through. Impact overall, top to bottom, will have a good week every now and then, but it is not a good show. I'm not ready to make that proclamation. Just like Raw, I wouldn't sit here and proclaim that Raw, on average, from week to week, is a good show. Both of these shows are going to have to do more to impress me, and all of you too. I mean, I don't think anybody should settle. Oh my God, we got 1 good week of wrestling, this show is great. No, it's not great. I want 4 straight weeks of good shows. I'm not saying I need a championship main event on every show every week. I don't need James Storm versus Bobby Roode on free TV every week or anything like that. But as a fan, I think I deserve better. And until I get that, I'm not willing to sit here and say that Impact is a good show or that Raw is a good show. I want good shows every week. I don't want good shows every now and then. And as far as Tony Schiavone is concerned, top 5 is a stretch. Tony Schiavone to me is not top 5. But that might just be my personal bias, because my top 5, in no particular order, has Jim Ross, of course, Vince McMahon, who I think is underrated as an announcer, even though he didn't know the names of any of the moves, Gorilla Monsoon, Bobby Heenan, Jesse Ventura. That probably would be my top 5 in no particular order. Tony Schiavone would be in my top 10, if it makes you happy. I think Schiavone, to some degree, got a bad rap in the later years of WCW, but by that point, he probably didn't care. And he had become almost a caricature of himself. Kind of like, some people said the same thing about Jim Ross in the later years, when he would go crazy and talk about government mules and Stone Cold, and he became a caricature of himself. It happens over time. When Tony Schiavone would go out there and talk about how tonight was the greatest night in the history of our sport, and it would only actually, apply, let's say, once for every 3 Nitro shows per year. I mean, Goldberg versus Hogan that night in the Georgia Dome, yeah, you can have Tony Schiavone say this is the greatest night in the history of our sport. But the week after, when Tony Schiavone said the exact same fucking thing for a DDP versus Scott Norton main event, you knew the guy was full of shit. So it really hurt his credibility. How much of that blame he deserves and how much of that he was told to do, I don't know. But Schiavone was very good at his job, but top 5, I don't buy it. I don't believe it. Even in WWF, when he was an announcer there in the late 80s for about a year or two, I thought his work was pretty good. I thought he and Jesse Ventura worked pretty well together. I thought Schiavone's work at SummerSlam 89 was actually very good. I just, in my personal top 5, he doesn't make the cut. Maybe he's number 6 or number 7, but top 5, I just don't see it. Dustin from Charlotte, North Carolina writes in, do you think the TNA could expand its product and name by taping shows from either high school or college gyms? Obviously, you would only use large schools, most likely in bigger cities. For example, instead of Macon, Georgia, you could hold an event in Atlanta. Aside from this, the schools could advertise the events for the community as well. That way, TNA doesn't have to bus fans in to fill the arena. TNA could also give back to the schools a portion of the proceeds from these shows to give back to the community. Then you may have some new converts for the TNA brand and eventually a strong enough number 2 in the market share to create a better wrestling product. You have some lofty expectations, my friend. In theory, it's a nice idea, especially, giving money back to the schools. But here's the thing, TNA doesn't have to give money back to anybody. It's a nice thing. Everybody loves to talk about charity. Oh, you got to give back. Steve Jobs was such a terrible person because he was one of the richest men in the world, and he didn't give money to any philanthropic causes that we were aware of. Maybe he did secretly. And he's what a bad person for that. Bill Gates gives all of his money away, and Mark Zuckerberg pledged $100 million to schools in Newark, New Jersey, blah, blah, blah. And I never buy into this shit, because if I were a billionaire, I would like to think there are some personally, there are charities that I would give back to. I obviously have a connection, with what happened in my family. I might want to give money to the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. I like pets, so maybe I'd give some money to the ASPCA. I have my own causes, but I don't fault anybody if they don't want to do something like that. I don't fault Steve Jobs for not giving his money away. He made his money. He doesn't want to give it away. That's his personal belief. I don't fault him for it. TNA doesn't have to give money away to anybody. WWE does not have to give money away to anybody either. It's a PR thing. And the thing about TNA is they're not in a position to be giving money away to anybody. TNA is still trying to build its brand. They're trying to get in the black or stay in the black if they are in the black now, instead of, in the red like they were for so many years. And, giving money away is not the way to do that, even if it's a little bit of money to this school and that school. Like I said, it's a nice idea. I would not do this. TNA needs one thing right now. They need credibility. They need people to watch their product and think, wow, this is the big time. When they have that giant arena set up with the big screen, as they did in Macon, Georgia, as they did earlier this year in Fayetteville, North Carolina, everybody commented about how much better the show looked. How much of a bigger feel Impact had. It was the same show, but they were in a different building, and it was amazing. The difference to people was like night and day. That's what TNA needs more of. They need to take that big screen and they need to put it in other big buildings. I'm not saying a 15,000 seat arena where you're only going to have 1,500 people. But TNA, it's going to be a while before they're able to fill even 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 seat buildings. Those are the buildings, nonetheless, they need to go to. They need to give Impact as much of a big feel as possible. And the gymnasium look, the Ring of Honor look, so to speak, is not going to work for TNA at this point. To me, that's a step backwards. TNA needs to make its product seem more big time. That's one of the biggest things that it's lacking. So this idea, to me, it's a step back for them. It's nice in theory. I would not do it if I were TNA. Rick from South Carolina writes in with a request. He was wondering if I could give a shout out to his friend Becca. It's her 27th birthday, it was anyway, on Friday. That was November 11th. Perhaps you can give her a shout out and then I could get her to start listening to your show. Well, she's not listening to my show now. She doesn't deserve a shout out. What's the matter with you? Well, I'll tell you what. I'll give her a shout out for you. So, happy birthday, Becca. Now get on iTunes and start listening to this show, damn it. By the way, to all the people who sent me links to this Occupy WWE petition or schedule or whatever the hell it is. Apparently there's actually a group that is trying to put together these Occupy protests for the WWE product. You have Occupy Wall Street and Occupy Oakland and Occupy Toronto, and people are dying and they're killing each other and all this crap. Well, somebody came up with the right idea, and we'll see if they actually follow through on it, to do Occupy WWE protest, I believe starting this Monday in Boston. I could be wrong about that, but I know for a fact that part of the schedule was also to protest near Madison Square Garden before the Survivor Series and all that, and everyone emailed me and they said, oh, what do you think about this? I think it's hilarious. I think it's fucking stupid. And if this is all people have time to do, it's one thing if you're going to protest for something, meaningful, if you're going to protest for human rights, or you're going to protest against the government, and whether I agree with it or disagree with it is irrelevant. I have my own thoughts about this, but to protest WWE, you're actually going to stand outside like a band of merry morons protesting professional wrestling. You're going to protest some sort of ridiculous form of entertainment, and this is how you're going to spend your time, and you're going to go from city to city, and what are you protesting exactly? You're protesting bad creative? This is why you're going to protest? Do you not have anything better to do with your lives? I don't find it funny at all. I just think it's fucking stupid. I think people in this world have way too much free time on their hands. I wish I had that sort of free time, and I could tell you that if I did, I wouldn't be protesting WWE outside the building. See, my show here is my own form of protest for WWE. And there's a hell of a lot better chance that they'll hear my voice through doing this show than they ever will standing 2 blocks away in the freezing cold outside the building with picket signs, as people poke fun at me and mock me and point at me from afar. In fact, I may do that myself. If I see these Occupy morons outside of Madison Square Garden for the Survivor Series, I will point and mock them as well. Maybe I'll take my iPhone, I'll go over and I'll interview them for the show and find out how completely stupid they are. Doing a podcast, writing a column, that's fine. That's normal. But gathering in the streets for something as inane and as unimportant and ridiculous as we're going to protest WWE because they're not pushing Zack Ryder, or we're going to protest WWE until Stephanie McMahon steps down as the head of creative. Really? This is what you're going to protest for? This is what you're going to waste your time doing? Get a life. Kenneth writes in, why don't rivalries begin at a pay-per-view or on the go-home show? Why does WWE not do this? I think it'll keep stories fresh while building up the upper mid-card. You start a feud on a go-home show. It's already presented to what should be a larger than normal TV audience. The reason that you don't start a feud on the Go Home show is because, in theory, your focus and attention on the Go Home show is to build up feuds that have already been built up over the course of a couple of weeks or a couple of months. So that 6 days later at the pay-per-view, you can get as many people as possible to spend money to see some sort of resolution to a feud that has already been ongoing for many weeks. That's how it works. And it does work. It worked for many years. The only reason it doesn't really work now is because the actual feuds and the stories they're trying to tell, most of the time, don't work, or they get rushed. And to say that, why don't rivalries ever begin on pay-per-view is not completely accurate. I mean, I agree it doesn't happen very often, but I could think of when Matt and Jeff Hardy, their last feud in WWE, got kicked off at a pay-per-view. It was at the Royal Rumble when Matt Hardy attacked his brother and cost him the championship. Hence, the rivalry began at a pay-per-view. I mean, even if you go back a couple of months, Kevin Nash made his return at SummerSlam, attacked CM Punk, gave him a jackknife, and cost him the WWE Championship. That was the kickoff to the CM Punk-Kevin Nash feud. Now, granted, that feud didn't go anywhere. All it did was really knock Punk down a couple of notches. Kevin Nash beat him up a couple of times, and then they never talked about it again. But technically, their feud did kick off at a pay-per-view. So I agree, it doesn't happen very often. But to say that it never happens would not be completely accurate. Nissim writes in, I've seen the speculation about the possible attempt to bring Shane McMahon back to WWE. I know about his current endeavors and the unlikeliness of this happening, but one never knows. I do believe Shane had charisma and some coolness and the guts to do crazy stuff, but I also know that he might not know how to run a business such as WWE. Do you believe, hypothetically, if he came back, that he could maybe, quote, save the company from his father? No, I don't, actually. I don't think Shane McMahon, as cool as he may be, is the answer to these problems that the company has, nor will he be the savior of WWE, nor is there any truth to these rumors for that matter. I know where it originated from, And it wasn't even said in that particular publication that he was coming back, but of course it gets reported and people say, oh, Shane McMahon's coming back. Yeah, maybe in a couple of years, who knows, Shane McMahon may come back. But Shane McMahon is not on his way back to WWE, so let's just squash that rumor right now. And again, as far as saving the company, does Shane have some sort of great creative vision that's so much better than his father's that he just needs to come back and it's going to lift the company to even greater success? I just don't see it happening. I think Shane was doing well, doing whatever he did behind the scenes in the digital division, and I think he was the head of the new media department, and he had a hand in the website and all that. It wasn't as though Shane McMahon had any sort of input into the creative aspect of WWE before he left. It's possible that he's got a lot of good ideas that we just don't know about, but I've never heard anything to suggest that Shane is some sort of creative genius. If anything, he was raised and brought up by his father. He probably thinks a lot like his father does. I would hope that he can make a decision a lot easier and stick with it, which his father doesn't seem to be able to do these days. But beyond that, I don't see anything to suggest that Shane McMahon would be some sort of savior for WWE. Matt writes in, did you get a chance to watch the November 5th edition of Ring of Honor yet? I just wanted to make a brief comment. The episode was a very good one, but you have to watch the promo with Kevin Steen and his attorneys. It's hilarious in a cheesy B-movie sort of way. Make sure to pay close attention to the attorneys' reactions during Steen's diatribe. Unfortunately, I have not seen ROH. Really, over the last 2 weeks, I just haven't had an opportunity to do so. And I really am anxious to see that because I think the way they've been handling the Kevin Steen angle really over the last year has been phenomenal. Kevin Steen lost a loser leave town match, I believe, in December of last year to El Generico at their final battle show. And he has been essentially out of Ring of Honor for almost a year now. Now, obviously, he's coming back. The plan was always for him to come back at some point. There is no such thing as a true-to-life loser leaves town match in wrestling. Let's just get that straight right off the bat. But you got to respect what ROH is doing here. You know, WWE, to them, the idea of John Cena losing a loser leave town match and being gone for, let's say, 6 months, it's not even something they could fathom. I mean, it's just an impossibility to them. He must be back on TV the next week. But with the way Ring of Honor has handled this has been very well done. And over the last several weeks, Steen has reared his ugly head. He has showed up at certain events and caused chaos and havoc and has threatened people, threatened bodily harm on people. And he'll be on his way back, and he'll be a bigger star for it when he comes back. That's why Ring of Honor, they get these simple concepts here. So I'm anxious to see the show, but I have not seen it yet. The other question Matt has here, regarding this week's episode of Raw, what was the crowd chanting during the Alberto Del Rio CM Punk confrontation, more specifically when Del Rio was speaking? I believe they were saying, "Who are you?" Which is always something, by the way, that you want to hear when your WWE champion is standing in the middle of the ring. Who are you? If I'm wrong, by the way, in what they were chanting, let me know. But based on what I was hearing and when I read reports back of people in the arena who were there, I believe that's what they were saying. This question comes from Ryan. Which aging wrestling personality, Ric Flair, Hulk Hogan, or Vince McMahon, is ruining his legacy more? And Ryan says that for him it's between Hogan and McMahon. Flair is just a sad old man. It comes down to Vinnie Mac or the Hulkster. So what are my thoughts on this? That's a very good question. It's a tough question to answer because all three have done really a horrendous amount of damage to their reputations. I'm not going to say Ric Flair, probably for the same reasons that you didn't say Ric Flair, just because as sad as Flair's fall has been when you hear about all the stories of his debt and you know, when that whole squabble happened with him and HighSpots.com, who had taken possession of his NWA belt as collateral, and there was this whole back and forth, and there were lawsuits. I mean, that to me was just so sad, and it just seemed to get worse and worse. And you hear about Flair and the incident in TNA in Europe where they wouldn't front him some money, and the bus left without him. And then even what happened at the Brooklyn show that I was at for TNA over the summer when Flair was there, he wouldn't come out before the crowd. So many different things to point to, as great as Ric Flair is, that just make you shake your head and make you very sad. But the thing about Ric Flair is he was always known as a big spender. This is not something new where Flair had this perfect life and everything was so great and his finances were always in order, and then for whatever reason he just lost his shit one day and the downward spiral began. That's not true. Flair has always had issues with money. In fact, I believe Jim Crockett and Vince McMahon over the years have had to help him get out of some jams that he's been in with the IRS. He's owed money in back taxes. And this goes back probably to the early 90s. But I mean, Flair has always been one to spend money, more money than he takes in, party like a rock star, and that's all well and good, but obviously, as you can see, it's caught up with the man, who, by the way, you would never know. I mean, he still lives a very charmed life. He drops one woman, he finds another. He still buys expensive Rolexes, and I'm sure travels around in a really nice car. Ric Flair is not destitute, even though he probably should be at this point. But you can make the argument that Flair has always been that way. This is not a surprise. It's always been part of his legacy. It's just gotten worse progressively over time. In terms of Hogan, I would make a similar argument in that Hogan was obviously the biggest name in the history of the business at one point. Still might be. Still might be. Certainly to the casual fan, far more people know who Hulk Hogan is than, say, Stone Cold Steve Austin. Even though Austin may have made more money in a shorter period of time than Hogan did. I mean, The Rock obviously trumps all of them. The Rock is a far bigger star now, but Hogan is one of the biggest names in the history of the business. And he'll go to his grave being one of the biggest names in the history of the business. But again, for years, Hogan was always known as a backstage politician, wielding his power, refusing to put people over, finding ways to not do the job, to get jobs, literally jobs, for his friends and his buddies, which is fine. I mean, there's something I can appreciate about wanting to help out your friends. I'm not saying he's an evil person for doing that, but he would always do it at the expense of others. Steve Austin is a great example. One of the earliest reasons Steve Austin had heat with Hulk Hogan was the fact that when Hogan came into WCW, obviously first Hogan didn't want to work with him. Austin wanted to work with Hogan, and he went to Bischoff, and I guess Hogan just didn't want to work with him. But it was also the fact that Austin at that point was the U.S. champ, I believe, and if I remember correctly, he was beaten for that title by Hacksaw Jim Duggan in 30 seconds. And Duggan, of course, was one of the guys that Hogan helped bring over to WCW. So there's things like that over time. You always heard stories like that about Hogan. Ricky Steamboat even goes back to '87. I've heard him say before that one of the reasons that he never got a bigger push perhaps than he deserved in his view at the time was that Hogan felt that Steamboat and Savage perhaps overshadowed him and Andre at WrestleMania 3. And there was only room at the top for one big babyface, and that wasn't going to be Steamboat. So again, you hear stories like this a lot. The point is, Hogan has always been a master politician. He's always, going back to the early 90s, tried to branch out, slap his name on a product, and the product would ultimately flop. I mean, remember Hulk Hogan Vitamins in the early 90s? Hogan had that show Thunder in Paradise when he went over to WCW. Well, even before he went over to WCW, Thunder in Paradise was on the air. I actually used to like that show, but it didn't last very long. The show was not a success. He had a store, I think, in the Mall of America, Hulk Hogan's Pasta Mania, and he slapped his name on some other products, I think, that went belly up as well. And in recent years, it's really no different. Hulk Hogan just came out with his own video game that got panned by people. I mean, people said this is one of the worst video games they've ever seen. His Micro Championship Wrestling show was a flop. His Celebrity Championship Wrestling on country music television, by the way, went one season. If it was a success, it would have been brought back. It wasn't. So Hogan has a history of all of these things. What makes his case sad was what went on with his family, his son, his wife, the divorce, much like Flair, and even the back surgeries. Much like Flair, Hogan has had a lot of hardships in recent years. But he's persevered. But the biggest one to me is Vince McMahon. This is the long way, by the way, of me getting to your answer. The one thing about Vince McMahon that he always was able to cling to was the fact that there were people out there who thought he was a genius. And maybe he was, for a period of time. Say what you want to about Vince McMahon, and God knows there were a lot of people in wrestling who, dealt with him, whether they were a performer or what have you, who would say some horrible things about Vince McMahon and what an asshole he can be. But Vince always seemed to have his head on his shoulders. He always seemed to do what was right for business. Turned his business around with a little bit of help from Montreal in the late 90s. Went full on with the heel Mr. McMahon character. And was just firing on all cylinders. And even when business started to drop off a little bit, it still seemed like Vince, generally speaking, knew what wrestling was all about and knew what to do to try to help turn business around. And I don't get that same feeling from Vince McMahon in recent years. I don't know of anybody who would call Vince McMahon a genius anymore. I can't think of one person who could honestly call Vince McMahon in 2011 a genius. When you look at the product that he's putting out there every single week, the way he changes his mind, they'll announce a match on Raw for SmackDown, for the SmackDown taping the very next night, and the next night at SmackDown, it's a completely different match. And these things are happening constantly. A lot of stories from backstage that Vince goes on a rampage every now and then, and he's not himself, and this and that. And to me, the biggest person ruining his legacy is probably Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon was always looked at as, the greatest promoter in the history of wrestling. He will go down as the greatest promoter in the history of wrestling. You got to look at his whole body of work. But in recent years, he's done more to undo all of that, to undo that reputation than anybody else. Because you didn't hear stories like this about Vince McMahon in the 80s, in the 90s, in the early 2000s, like you heard those stories about Flair and his finances, or you heard those stories about Hogan and his failed business dealings and his political maneuverings behind the scenes. But with Vince, this is a relatively recent phenomenon that's actually quite sad, and it's scary because, WWE, as WWE goes, so goes the wrestling business, and if WWE, starts taking a dive even more so than they have been, it's a scary proposition for wrestling in general in this country. I would hate to think, what things might look like in 5 or 6 years if that were to happen. And WWE is still a very profitable company, but Vince, his baby is this new network they're launching. It's all Vince. He wants this network and he wants it fast. He wants this network launched within the next 5 months. And I've talked about it before. If this network fails, if this network goes belly up, I'm not saying it's going to kill the whole company, but it's bad times for WWE. And Vince has had his share of failures in the past as well. In terms of the WBF, the XFL. Doesn't do very well when he tries to branch out from wrestling. Well, here's a wrestling-related network. You would think, okay, this thing will be a success. There's no guarantee of that. He's the one who's pushing it down everybody's throat. And if this thing fails, I think that more than anything else will do more to crush whatever legacy he may have built up for himself. He's banking everything on this network. So I think Vince has done more damage to his reputation in recent years than even Hogan and Flair. Even though you hear more sad stories about Hogan and Flair, like I said, it's not a huge surprise. But Vince's legacy, he's always had that going for him. And you can't say that anymore. Vince McMahon is far from being a genius. Craig from Norwich, UK writes in, he has a request, wanted to know if I can give a shout out to his new nephew, who was born 11/11/11, just after 11 a.m. The baby was 10 pounds, 10 ounces. That's a big baby. Anyway, I guess the baby's name is Dylan James Fulcher, so give him a shout out. Born 11/11/11. That's something to remember. He also says that it's Movember, and all around the world people are growing mustaches for charity. I too am attempting to grow some facial fuzz, or just a comb over of my nasal hair. And if you want to sponsor myself or just donate to the cause, he says, feel free to go to the Mobro page, which is mobro.co. You can actually go to mobro.co/VARDS1. That's the number 1. And I believe that is Craig's page if you want to contribute, if you want to just point and laugh, whatever you want to do. But it sounds like a good cause, so you can head on over there and show your support for Craig and his porn stash. Adrian from Trinidad, West Indies writes in, he was wondering, Undertaker's Hell's Gate, before it was removed from his arsenal and reintroduced as the modified version he currently uses, what was it that caused his victims to start coughing up blood? I believe the idea behind it was his knee or his leg was being pushed up into the opponent's throat, which I guess caused some level of damage, and you saw blood. I don't know. Obviously, it looked somewhat ridiculous, but with Undertaker, it works, because Undertaker is Undertaker, and, what are you going to say? So I think that was the idea behind it. He was pushing up into their larynx, their throat, and causing damage, and hence the blood. And Adrian also says he wanted to know if he can get a shout-out for his dogs. And when I read this, I thought to myself, okay, these shout-outs are getting a little ridiculous now, but I'll do it for him. He is a big fan of the show, and I thought this shout-out was kind of clever. He says, his dogs always seem relaxed and calm whenever I sit and listen to the Sound Off. Their names are Apple, Daisy, Doug, Ocean, and Papa. Weird names, but I know, he says, but my mom named them and she's kind of off her rocker. He says, I'm a Facebook friend, Twitter follower, and YouTube subscriber. I enjoy the Sound Off with a turkey sandwich and a Pepsi, and when I'm doing my chores and relaxing with my dogs, I listen to the sweet sounds of the podcast. So that comes from Adrian. Thank you for that. Tony has a question. I was just talking about Vince McMahon. He says, according to reports, Vince is so tired after Raw that he just approves whatever creative comes up with for SmackDown, which is generally why SmackDown has been decent or an enjoyable show of late, and Raw, well, you've seen the episodes of Raw from late. Do you think Vince should step away from Raw and SmackDown and let creative do their job? I do. I think it would actually benefit Vince to actually get some freaking rest, get some sleep, and step away, even if it's for a month. I think even on a trial basis, if you want to just shift that responsibility, fully shift that responsibility over to Triple H and Stephanie for a month or two, and let's see what happens. Let's see what kind of shows that we get. Let's see if the ratings go up or down. I mean, as fans, I don't really give a shit what the ratings are. I know they do. They have to at least be somewhat concerned. I mean, the Monday Night Wars have been over for some time now. It's kind of ridiculous they still put the emphasis on ratings that they do. But I understand ratings are still important. If they drop below a certain point, you're serving a master. That master is USA Network. And if you ever, get kicked off USA Network and let's say their own network hasn't launched yet or their own network isn't really available in too many homes, and you lose USA as a home, you're fucked. Because without TV, there is no WWE. So I get why they need to be at least somewhat concerned about the ratings. But I think Vince stepping away on a trial basis would be a fantastic idea. Maybe he steps away and we come to realize you don't know what you got until it's gone. Maybe the product really just goes to shit and we're all on bended knee begging for Vince McMahon to come back. Somehow I don't think that would happen, though. Part of me also doesn't think, quite frankly, things would change much. I think we may be putting a little too much emphasis on this, but I certainly would be in favor of Vince stepping away for a brief period of time. Let's see how things go. I mean, really, what have you got to lose? I want to give a shout out here to Jacob. He says the Sound Off is something he looks forward to every week. While he does not watch all of the wrestling shows each week, he does keep up with them on SE Scoops, and the analysis that I provide is both entertaining and educational. I've learned so much from your show, and it's taught me how to observe wrestling from a critical lens I'd never thought of before. Keep up the good work, and I hope I can get a shout-out. So this is your shout-out. He's got a question, too. He's been a listener since episode 172. Do you think that Ring of Honor has the best tag team division in wrestling? I've started watching their new show, and it seems they have a lot of tag teams that have good chemistry. I also believe the storytelling is just better overall as well. That, again, it comes from Jacob from Minneapolis, Minnesota. Jacob is realizing what I think a lot of people would realize if they gave Ring of Honor a shot. It's just a much easier product to follow. And I understand that some people only are into the big stars and the big pomp and circumstance and the big pageantry and pyro and all that. But if you give Ring of Honor a chance, and I don't mean just for 1 week, I mean watch the show for 2, 3, 4 weeks in a row, you can't tell me you can't find an hour of your time to contribute to Ring of Honor. It's not a 2-hour show. I think if you are a real wrestling fan, you'll like what you see. And if you're not a real wrestling fan and you come to realize that you're really just a WWE fan or a TNA fan, that's okay too. But I think everybody should at least give the show a shot. And as far as their tag team division, they've got a lot of great tag teams in Ring of Honor right now. The Briscoes, they've got Shelton Benjamin and Charlie Haas, who call themselves the world's greatest tag team, for crying out loud. They've got the All Night Express of Rhett Titus and Kenny King. Kenny King is another guy that WWE let slip away, and he's turned into a tremendous talent. They had the Kings of Wrestling, who are now with WWE, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at that. And there's other teams in Ring of Honor as well. I'm trying to think here. They just slipped my mind. There's a couple of other teams that they have. Certainly well more than what WWE has. And even TNA for a while had a really great tag team division with Beer Money and the Machine Guns. I know they had the British Invasion, and now they've got Inc. and Mexican America, and I don't think much else. But tag team wrestling is a lost art. It could be very exciting, and certainly there's been a lot of single stars who have spawned off from being part of a tag team. Maybe they didn't quite have their personality down. Maybe they were a little shy. And look at somebody like Bret Hart, who admits he couldn't do promos for shit at the very beginning. He would wear his glasses because his eyes would be darting around back and forth. He was so nervous that he would wear those shades. But over time, teaming with the Anvil and doing those joint promos together, he got better at it, he got more comfortable, and Bret Hart went on to become one of the biggest stars of all time. Shawn Michaels came from a tag team, went on to become one of the biggest stars of all time. And you could find other examples of that as well, although they may be the two biggest stars to have come from tag teams. But the point is, Ring of Honor's got a tremendous tag team division. If you're into tag team wrestling, you need to watch ROH. And that's the damn truth. And if you're not into tag team wrestling, you still should watch ROH and give it a chance. But if I knew the WWE, if I could trust that WWE would do the right thing, I wish all of these teams would come over to WWE so I could watch them on Raw and SmackDown every week. The problem is I have no faith in WWE that if these teams came over, that they would be anything other than a preliminary act. They'd probably break them up and start building friction between them after 3 weeks. Which is generally how things are done in wrestling these days when it comes to tag teams. No more are teams together for a couple of years before they break up. So, of course, you rush it, and by the time they break up, nobody gives a fuck, because they were only together for a month or two anyway. And this is the vicious cycle that we kind of go back and forth with. So anyway, they've got a lot of great teams, and we'll see. Kings of Wrestling, Claudio's already down in FCW. They gave him a new name, and Chris Hero is going to be there soon. There's been a bit of a holdup, I think, with his paperwork. I don't think they're going to put the two of them together as a team. I think they'll probably, keep them as individuals, which is fine. I think Claudio and Chris Hero are two guys who also have, aspirations of being big single stars, and each of those guys, I think, one day could be a world champion. So it would be a shame if they didn't put them together as a team at first and then eventually split them off. But yeah, we'll see what WWE does with them. I think that's going to be the real litmus test going forward. Let's see how they treat two guys who don't even necessarily need to be down in developmental. They're that good. They've been doing this for enough time. I don't think they need to be developed anymore. Let's see how they treat them. Let's see how well they get over. If you have a question for the show, want to reach out to me directly, you can do so by email at thesolomonster@gmail.com. You can follow me on Twitter. It's at Solomonster is my Twitter handle. We're over 1,130 followers and counting. And you could also friend me on Facebook, facebook.com/thesolomonster. No spaces or underscores or anything. Just type in the Solomonster. Facebook.com/thesolomonster. You can find me on there. You can also find the official Solomonster Sounds Off fan page on Facebook as well if you type in the show name in the search box. You can also find us in iTunes and subscribe. It's free. It costs you nothing. And on YouTube, you can subscribe to my channel. My username is The Solomonster, all one word. I did put up the first 2 episodes ever of the Sound Off. Talk about a flashback to November of 2007. Episode number 1 and episode number 2 spliced together in a single video over 30 minutes in length. You can check that out on my channel right now and leave some feedback. I never thought I would re-release those shows. I still can't believe I did, but they're out there if you want to listen to them and find out what was going on in the world of wrestling back in 2007, what I was sounding off about back then. So that's a fun time. And that's going to do it for this week. Episode 191 will hopefully be out next weekend. Like I said, I'm going to the Survivor Series next Sunday. I don't really want to have to worry about doing a show that day and then rushing out. So if there is a show, it will likely be up by Saturday night. If there is a show. Follow me on Twitter and Facebook. I'll keep you guys updated on whether or not there will be one or not. But until 191, be well, stay safe, and we'll see you right back here hopefully next week for another episode of The Sound Off on SEScoops.com. Take it easy, guys.
Let me tell you something, fella.
This is John from Northern Ireland.
I am AJ Grimaldo.
And quite simply the fastest 60 minutes on the internet.
The Solomonster Sounds Off on SEScoops.com.